Oh, it's gorgeous. And there's also the.
All right. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Clark County Advisory Committee meeting. Looks like we've got a few people on. So, hi, Susan. I know you're going to be, Susan, I'm going to probably ask you to make a couple presentations, or at least an update on the Tilly Trust for me here in a little bit. So,
sure. No problem.
Perfect.
I think everybody knows each other except for maybe Max. Max, if you could introduce yourself, then I think everybody will know each other.
Sure. Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Great. I'm Max Dugan. I'm with Geosyntec Consultants, work with Amir, and am supporting PMing the local plan development for Deanna for the MLRP project.
Yeah, we're gonna have Matt give you a little update on that later on as well, and we're excited to have him. He's already been involved quite a bit with MLRP, and so I wanted to make sure that you all get a chance to meet him, and he can give you an update on where we're at on that. And is there anything for the group before we kind of jump into the agenda?
No, I think we can jump right in.
Get started? All right. In that case, Susan, I'm going to ask you and Kathy to maybe give us an update on the Tilly Trust.
Sure. Let's see. Well, last week we had an MLRP grantee meeting that was in person, where we visited the Caponero project. The Caponero project is currently had its second year of seeding for cover crop placed on, and all topographical work has been done. So the installation of hummocks and borders for our test plots. So that's looking good. We're on track. We have the land fallowing program. First payments went out last Friday. There's 3 payments overall in that project, if you recall, and their first payment showing after their seeding of their cover crop was released last week. We also are working on watershed project. Emily's handling the majority of that, getting our ducks in a row, and more detail will be coming on that within the next month. We also are working on SALT program for both the trust and Tulare County. And we are in the midst of recruiting members that want to be on that committee. We will start targeting that more directly after Thursday's meeting with MLRP. I think that's it, unless I'm missing something, Kathy. Not thinking of anything else.
No, you might just tell them what SALT stands for.
Oh, sorry. Sustainable Ag, yeah. Sustainable Ag Land Conservation is what it's for. So it is only, people will only be eligible for it if they live in an area that is prime farmland and has 2 sources of water is typically the requirements for the program, but that is being established.
Hey, Susan, what do you see as the coordination between that program, the SALT program, and MLRP?
I think for MLRP, it is an alternative for folks that specifically are concerned, that have prime ag land and are concerned about their generational ability to maintain their farms. There is a revenue opportunity when you go into an ag conservation. It's typically the value of the property minus the development rights. That's really what you're giving up. You own the farm, nothing changes. You just cannot do anything other than farm on that property long term. So it helps to inject a little bit of revenue into their pocket that may help them be more sustainable in the short run or long term. They may decide to, it might give them that buffer they need to not farm, to go fallow some of the land temporarily. things in that nature. That's my thoughts.
Okay, great, thank you.
Yeah.
Don't see any questions for you, so I'm gonna keep moving
Just,
on. Oh,
one quick thing, so in the putting aside prime farmland for salt conservation, is there any consideration to where that prime farmland may be located in terms of, habitat corridors, et cetera, that may be, available or considered for MLRP projects? So I'm thinking if you have a salt ground that's in the middle of kind of MLRP prime ground, it may become an issue. So just wondering if there's any consideration for that.
Right, there will be a whole list of criteria that have to be met in order for a project to meet eligibility for SOLC. That's one of the things we're in the process of doing. I'm confident that that would be one item that would be explored. There's also, we are waiting on there's a mapping program that's been worked on that will kind of highlight where these areas specifically are. And so we'll be able to identify those ahead of time as well. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Susan.
You're welcome.
All right. I know we're jumping around a little bit, but I'm gonna go ahead and give the update on the Tule Subbasin GSP, and the reason for that, and then we're gonna jump back to MLRP, because you're gonna see some coordination that needs to occur between those two documents. And so I apologize, I know we're gonna be kind of MLRP and then back to MLRP after the GSP stuff, but it'll make sense here in a bit. All right, Stacy, yeah, we've got a short presentation. It's probably longer than I intended it to be, but so let me get.
I'm trying to get rid of them.
Yeah, there we go. All right. So, we had a couple meetings with some key players, both the state water staff, State Water Resources Board staff, and just yesterday with some of the NGOs involved. And based on that, some of those discussions, it's going to impact what you see here on the screen. I'm going to talk a little bit about the number of wells that we're talking about potentially being impacted in the Tule Subbasin. We're going to talk a little bit about the well mitigation policy and how that's changing based on these conversations with these two entities, and then how we're going to finalize the subsidence SMC. We've still got a fair amount of work to do, and some of this will look familiar for those of you that have sat through some of Tom's other, and I used a lot of, I should give credit to Tom Harder, because a lot of these are his slides. I'm not going to duplicate these. These are what's been presented to the state staff and to the NGOs. But right now, based on the impact that we're seeing, if we were to hit the minimum threshold currently established, or the new minimum thresholds currently established for the subbasin, we would be looking at 11% of wells being impacted and 18% of the total number of domestic wells.
Please forward the link to this meeting, Derek Hansen. You're gonna lose what you see on.
Okay.
Sorry, guys, we're gonna pause.
No, they may see it, you
So,
may.
somebody's looking for a link to the meeting, we wanna get it to them.
I think you're sharing your screen.
Yeah, I am. Okay, so I'm gonna stop that for just a moment.
Yeah.
Okay.
So while Stacy's doing that, I'm going to keep talking to the group. The key here is that both the state board staff, they really did not respond well when they saw that it was 18% of the domestic wells. I'm not talking about, and keep in mind, it's 18% of all domestic wells, not 18% of the wells that are impacted are domestic.
It seems like COVID kind of spurred it, you know? I think it was all coming, but not as fast, and then
Well,
COVID just kind of sped the whole thing up,
Yeah.
right?
I think you might need to you guys might need to mute yourselves. We've got some, stuff coming through. So 18%, and the state board, as you can imagine, they were like, what, that's a lot. The NGOs also had a very similar response. Tom asked them point blank what an acceptable number would be, and, we didn't get that, right? We're trying to ask that question multiple different ways, and we never did get to a number. So, when we got that feedback from the state, the decision was made is that we need to probably reduce the number of impacted wells by 8. Guys, you might need to mute yourselves. If you're not muted, please mute yourself, just because I think we're getting some feedback still. And that's an ongoing discussion. So right now what Tom is doing is looking through, actually, go ahead and go to the next slide.
Fine.
Yeah. So this is a layout of the general areas of where the wells are the highest that are going to be impacted. So Tom is going to go through and start seeing if we were to raise minimum thresholds in certain levels or certain areas only, could we reduce the number of impacted wells down to, closer to say, 10 to lesser, to a smaller number. And so he's in the process of doing that evaluation right now. There was some pushback from some of the landowners because they already feel like, hey, in certain areas, as you can see, some of the heaviest wells are up in Lower Tule and in Pixley and Eastern Tule. There was some pushback from some of the landowners who were feeling like they already have restrictions on them, and now we're putting even more restrictions. For obviously, if we're going to raise water levels, that's going to involve even more restrictions in pumping. So there was some real pushback, which, Deanna, as you pointed out in that meeting, was likely to happen, and sure enough, it happened.
Yeah, we're getting feedback from state board members, or state board staff, as well as NGOs, but I think they're going to have to be a spot where we stake our flag in the ground and we explain why we came to the number we came to, and we have to go with that. And I don't know, the term they're using is surgically raise water levels in certain areas, but I think it remains to be seen if those areas will accept that. So we may end up at the 18%, and I would keep in mind that 18% of possible impact means only if we hit minimum thresholds. If we manage to our measurable objectives, which is our objective, we won't have 18%. So I think it's the way you frame the discussion with state board, and I think that, eventually we're going to have to, like I said, stake our flag in the ground and defend it and be comfortable with it, because I don't believe we're ever going to get full positive reactions from either state staff or NGOs. I do think it's very wise of the Tule Subbasin to have these meetings. We're meeting with Community Water Center and Self-Help and the groups that are before state board members, voicing their opinions. And, regardless of the outcome, we certainly can say that we have engaged them, we've asked for feedback, we've been in discussions with them, and I think that puts us on really sure footing. And we are listening. The basin's listening. We're trying to incorporate everything they're asking for that's reasonable, that can be reasonably met. So
Changes have been made to the well mitigation program specifically based on comments back from these groups. There has been, some good dialogue, but Deanna's right. At some point, you just got to put your flag in the ground and say, look, this is what we think as the locals is what we can reasonably do and what we can reasonably manage to. So there's some more ongoing discussions about the final water levels. We don't anticipate those changing in I'm saying that now, and then I'll probably come to regret saying that out loud, but right now, that's not part of the discussion in terms of that, not strategic, surgical, raising of those values.
In the aquifer.
Yeah. All right, next. So I included this slide just as a reminder, for everybody that, you know, if we were to hit those minimum thresholds, you know, we'd still be looking at about $21 million in a well mitigation program, and even at the measurable objectives, we'd still, you know, we're still at over 12 million. So these are not insignificant values. I will say again that Tom is currently using the Oscar database, or mostly the Oscar database. I think he did some wells, but the state board staff has actively encouraged him to use the data set from the USGS, which is actually what we're using in the Tulare Lake subbasin. And someone made the comment that whatever Tulare Lake ends up doing is probably the way that most of the state's going to end up doing. So keep in mind that if Tulare Lake capitulates on something, it's probably going to become the de facto norm for the entire state. So in Tulare Lake, we're actually using USGS. We told the state we're you know, as Deanna said, we put our flag in the ground. We told them we're not using Oscar at all. We're using USGS, and then we've added the Kings County database, well database, into that. Where there's duplicates, we've obviously taken those out, and we actually ended up with more wells than what was in Oscar. But they're probably more realistic as to what exists today, and even that data set we think probably has too many shallow wells in it. So the point being, I think the numbers that you see here are the best data set that Tom has at this time, but will probably do not represent the actual number of wells that will be impacted.
And Mayor, if I can just add a comment.
Sure.
In recent GSP deficiency letters for the Butte Valley subbasin, DWR is now also taking this approach of dry wells, and they noted that 9% was too much. So just a point of information there.
Yeah.
How do you get
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
20,000 costs on an ag well versus 90 on a domestic?
So 90.
I don't know how many you're gonna drill for 20,000.
No. So that, I'm glad you asked that question. It's worth clarifying. The 90,000, Mike, is actual, you know, put in a new well. And the 20 there is just the evaluation of what's causing the ag or industrial well to have impacts. It is not the intention to, if the ag well is contributing to the problem, it's not the intention that 20,000 obviously is not going to cover the reinstallation. But if the ag well was causing part of the overdraft, then it's not the intention of the group to pay for that ag well.
How deep, that number seems high on the domestic wells, having experience on some recent drilling of domestic wells is half that price.
So it includes some other things. It includes,
Water.
yes, supplying water to that home until the well is drilled. It includes some other things, and this is the number that Self-Help gave us, is their actual cost in doing it, and they've been doing it for some time, so.
I can see it supplying water,
Yeah, so we have agreed to supply water to the home until the well is drilled. And right now it's within 72 hours, and they want it sooner than that.
Yeah.
So,
They also want it not to be a reimbursable. They want us to front the money for the well installation, so it's not an overburden on the landowner, on the domestic landowner. So those are still details to be worked out, but that's good feedback, and yes, that number, that 90,000, is what they recommended.
If I recall, that number started at 70,000,
Yes.
which was just the replacement cost, and then it added the 20,000 for investigation and water supply.
yeah.
we ought to buy some well drilling rigs.
I the thought has gone through my mind, like, I'm like, hey, this engineering thing doesn't work out, I'm gonna have a well driller. All right,
Okay.
Stacy, and I'm sorry, I can't see if anyone on the line has any questions, so please feel free to jump in at any point, just unmute yourself and jump in. Okay, so moving on to land subsidence, this is still an ongoing discussion, but I just wanted to make this group aware of some of the items that we are currently discussing with the subbasin as a whole. So this is land subsidence from 2020 to 2023. Tom has this particular slide on here, so I just kept it, but it just to kind of give you an idea of where the land subsidence is happening in the Tule subbasin. Obviously, the redder, as we move from kind of the dark blue is the areas with the least amount of subsidence. As you move into the green, you end up with more, and then orange and red being the areas of the highest subsidence. You can see that that's up towards the north, the northern portion of the lower Tule subbasin, or lower Tule GSA is where we're seeing some of the highest subsidence, and then you can also see that pretty much on the west side, the subsidence rates are higher than what we're seeing on the east side, which is what you would expect, considering that the clay starts to peter out as we move eastward. The clay, as it peters out, also then tends to rise in elevation, and it's not obviously, becomes a semi-confined aquifer at that point as well, as opposed to closer to the lake bottom where it acts much more like a confined aquifer. Geosyntec is currently in the process of preparing a memo on behalf of Tri-County to the subbasin, talking about the fact of where recharge and how recharge occurs below the clay, how that water that's being intercepted east of the clay is preventing some of the recharge efforts that are occurring. And we actually have a draft of that done, and we'll have that to Tri-County by the end of the week and early next week. So that's one of the things that we're currently working on. We think that the east side is not fully engaging on what's causing all of the subsidence, and we're not saying that they're responsible for all of it, of course not. Obviously, we need to reduce pumping below the clay as well, but it's hindering our ability to achieve sustainability below the clay and the water levels and the amount of pressure that we need to maintain below that clay. All right, next slide. Okay, so this particular one, I really like this slide because obviously it makes the engineer and me happy, but it's really, what we're trying to show here is how water levels and subsidence are related. And you can see over the years, when water levels tend to rise, we tend to get a flattening of the rate of subsidence. I think that's really important because what that starts to show you is that, where do we need to maintain our water elevation in order for subsidence eventually to slow down and start to, and start to stop. So, it also shows you how much subsidence can occur in a very short amount of time as water levels drop. Over the course of a year, subsidence rates are not the same. It also matters what time of year you're measuring things and all kinds of stuff. So this is a graph with a lot of good data, but for everyone, I think the real issue here is just, you can, the orange line where you start to see it flatten out in areas, that's the key is, hey, look at the water level and look at where that line is starting to flatten out. And we can, we've done that for a few wells where we can see that correlation. All right, next slide. values that you see listed here, the 8 to 10 feet, 6 to 8 feet, so forth, those are the amount of subsidence that was predicted in the 22 revised, GSP. And the state board staff, again, feels like these values are very high. These are the predicted values based on the modeling results. So even if you put in all the projects, everything that we've said that we were gonna do, you were still looking, you know, in some areas of 8 to 10 feet of subsidence.
This is a 2040?
This is 2040, yeah, Mike, exactly, it's 2040. So this is the predicted values.
It's with all the ramp down schedules it has everything included.
Yeah.
Does it include the ramp down schedules in the Kaweah subbasin to go out any further, just looking at that piece up in?
No.
I think it does not, because I don't think that in 22 we had.
Yeah, you wouldn't have had greater Kaweah,
We wouldn't have had that data set. So I think Tom had to make some assumptions on what's happening in Kaweah and Tulare Lake, and based on that is where these values.
Is this map, though, with the model inconsistent with the other map you were showing with the from 20 to 2023?
I don't think so, Mike, in the sense that, forget the numbers for a second. I think that the areas that we're showing the highest levels of subsidence still show that on both maps.
I thought it was more green in that 8 to 10 foot, and there's more red up in that northern area.
Yeah. Stacy, if you want to just jump back one slide, 2 slides, thanks.
There. Based on that, it looks like that northern area has a lot more subsidence.
Yeah. So,
And this other is, you know, a lot less, so that's why.
It still comes down that way, leave the shark fin out, but come down around that to, you know, to the east of it just slightly.
so
I'm
Mike,
just surprised, Deanna, when you look at the prediction, I would have guessed the highest would have been up in that northern area.
it is, it is.
Yeah.
But Mike, I will say that, you know, the predictions take into account modeling, it takes into account the step down too. So they do, you know, they're,
I got you.
yeah, so he's, you know, again, you know, this is a model result, so I want to make that 100% clear, and we all, you know, models are.
Well, that's my point.
So, but,
It's greater than 10 up in that region up there.
yeah.
And then 8 to 10, so,
yeah,
and, you know, like Amir said, it is a modeled result, but in general, it's the areas that are having the most significant subsidence.
so, Mike, you know, I will say, I've said this to Deanna a whole bunch, the rate of subsidence is not slowing down in the dry years. The programs that we have in place, you know, the pumping limitations, they're not slowing the rate of subsidence sufficiently. We're still seeing, in some cases, a foot of subsidence. And, you know, the map you just saw was from 2020 to 2023, and 23, as we all know, was a wet year, so. But in some of those years, we still have like a foot of subsidence. So if you don't implement some of the limitations and projects sooner, you're going to get, you know, 3 years from now, you might end up with 3 more feet of subsidence, which puts you close to the 8 to 10 foot, you know, for another 16 years. So yeah, I don't think that these numbers are too far off.
No, I don't either.
Yeah.
I mean,
In fact, I think they're probably closer to reality by the time you implement. But the state board, I will tell you, you know, they had a very visceral reaction to these type of numbers.
we saw Dee Dee's.
Yeah, you saw Dee Dee's reaction when I said
9 feet?
Yeah, 9 feet, right? I said 9 feet to her, and she was like, you know, like, are you kidding me? Yeah. So, but like I said, if you're still getting a foot of subsidence a year in some places, it doesn't take very many years to get you know, to those type of numbers.
Even the subsidence management area in the eastern Tule, some areas showed upwards of 1.5 acres, or 1.5 feet of subsidence in just 2 years.
Yeah.
And that's with management actions in that area. You can argue, the effectiveness of those, but it's reality.
It's reality, yeah. And every year you're waiting, you know, the next dry year, which, you know, it's raining a little bit right now, but we're what, 14% of normal or whatever it is, I can't remember.
55 degrees outside.
Yes, and
Yeah.
it's gonna be 72 next week, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, all right, Stacy. Okay, so the Thule's approach has been very focused on effective land uses, the land uses that are affected, and they've been very much focused on canals, the water delivery pipeline, and the wells, the first three. And the feeling is that if you, and flood control, I'm sorry, that's the other one, the flood control. So they have been very focused, and one of the disagreements, and I've, you know, said this out loud several times, that one of the disagreements we have with this approach is that it doesn't seem right that you can continue to have, you know, subsidence occurring and do management areas and worry about those, and yet still have 6 feet of subsidence or 8 feet of subsidence, you know, right outside in other areas of the subbasin. So we have been pushing the Thule subbasin to address subsidence across the entire subbasin, and that's what we think is going to be required to get the plan approved by the state board. All right, Stacy.
No doubt on that.
No agreement on that either.
No.
So this is a kind of a summary of what I just said, where, you know, they're looking at areas, again, this is the map in the background is Tom's model prediction. But he's kind of drawn this in areas and saying, okay, we're going to focus in on B, C, and D, and less on F and E and then in A and some of those areas. And we still, or actually, it's more like B and C and less on F and D, and we still think that those need, you know, substantial focus as well. All right. And a lot of what's driving that discussion and a lot of the subsidence conversation that's happening in the Thule subbasin has been focused on particularly where the flooding occurred in 23 and what levees and other things that may have to be protected in order to, or built and maintained in order to protect from that kind of flooding. And while we certainly understand the flooding is a concern, we don't think that that's the only concern when it comes to subsidence. Okay, so these are the areas that are being looked at for levee improvements. Specifically, you know, this is very much focused on areas where the levees we think are starting to flatten out. We have some disagreement on the Deer Creek one there. We don't, you know, we don't think that's really a subsidence issue. That's just a sheer capacity issue there. And then this, yeah, so Tom included this slide in particular because it kind of shows where we're at, and this is up in that northern area that we're seeing where the levee's starting to flatten out in the lower Thule area. It starts to show you where we're at, how much subsidence has already occurred since 2020, and then if we start to establish our measurable objective, you know, if we allow for 8 feet of subsidence as the minimum threshold in this area, you're looking at you know, almost $4 million in levee improvements if that was going to be the case. But even at 6 feet, you're still looking at close to $1.5 million in levee improvements. So there's a definite feeling about, you know, and you can see that we've already lost what is that, 2 feet there. so there's a definite feeling of, you know, if we're gonna protect these, levees, how are we gonna be able to do that? How much are we gonna pay for mitigation? Who is gonna be responsible for paying for that mitigation? And, you know, and there's some difficult conversations that are still need to be had, you know, as part of the Tule mitigation plan for subsidence. And the other, this is based on the flooding, and that's been, like I said, primarily there on the east side, or excuse me, the west side. And again, it seems very focused on just that levee and that flooding that occurred, and not about areas, you know, is Mike, as you were pointing out, there's areas directly east of that circle that are having the same amount of subsidence as the areas within the circle. So these are still difficult conversations that we're having.
Fair.
Some ongoing work, you know, we're still trying to establish a cumulative land subsidence that comes down to that 8 to 10 feet numbers that we talked about. How, you know, the transitional pumping, and again, that's an area of discussion because we feel like it's all the pumping that's occurring is having some impact. It's not just the transitional pumping. It's about pumping overdraft in even the dry years. And if that overdraft is occurring in the dry years everywhere, it needs to be addressed, you know, in those dry years. And then, you know, we agree 100% with Tom about that deep aquifer pumping. We do think that that's a critical one that needs to be evaluated and come up with a groundwater level S&C based on, you know, for the deep aquifer. And that's, oh, good. Hey, that was shorter.
Mira, and I could see the conflict coming if I had shallow wells and then we're gonna have to pay for subsidence. I'd be saying, I'm not paying, I'm not the one doing it, it ought to be all the deep well pumpers.
Yeah.
I mean, so at some point, I mean, I would think either the state board's gonna raise that or we're gonna have to address it, because I assume landowners, you know, with the shallow wells are gonna say, why are you making me pay?
Yeah. There's very much, you know, Mike, you've sat through some of the Tulare Lake, meetings, and that comment has been made by the state board staff. Something similar to that has been made by state board staff, where they're not expecting the payments to be equal across, you know, a subbasin, and maybe not even equal based on the amount of pumping that, you know, if you're a small pumper in that deep aquifer versus larger pumpers in that deep aquifer. So there's that issue still needs to be decided, and how we're going to pay for some of these mitigation is very much a open question right now. The Tule subbasin, that's going to be the tricky part, is trying to decide, because they very much have relied on mitigation as their focus. And I think, you know, it's easy to say that, but it's a lot harder when it comes down to dollars and cents.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I don't know how you mitigate flooding, and I don't know how you mitigate railroads, high-speed rail. So, you know, that's all in the, discussion, and that's not a possibility. So,
We have to start mitigating high-speed rail.
problem without a
We're
good
talking
formula.
billions.
Yeah, right?
And I was thinking
That ain't
about,
gonna be a cheap one.
and I was thinking about FEMA grants. Are they gonna say, we're not gonna give you a grant, a flood grant for not mitigation, but for the levees on the Tule because you guys have subsidence? You're not eligible? I mean, federal dollars are gonna be important in the valley.
So there's
Exactly right.
definitely a feeling that we're not doing enough, and we're not taking immediate steps. I think, Sam, were you at Aqua this year? Did you listen to Paul's?
I think so, yeah.
Yeah, right, where Paul Gofflin basically came out and said, you gotta do it now.
Don't forget that Sigma gave everyone till 2040.
Apparently.
It's out the window.
Not too far away.
It's getting closer every year, isn't it?
Oh,
Seems
yeah.
like a long way away.
We're in year 4, Mike.
Yeah, I know.
No,
I know.
it's scary. So, yeah, long answer to your short question. Those discussions really do need to still take place, and decisions need to be made as to who's gonna pay for what mitigation.
Well, then on the flip side, the shallow domestic wells, the guys with the deep wells are probably say, well, you guys with the shallower ones are the ones causing that, so you guys ought to pay for those.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, it's getting real. And $20 million is not insignificant, and, you know, if the state board implements those penalties, that's a significant amount of money too. It's gonna be more than 20 million for the basin per year. Okay, any questions from anyone on the call? All right, in that case, let me give you I don't have a slide presentation. You hold your chairs for Tulare Lake, but I'll give you a quick update on Tulare Lake because we are quite a bit farther along. We actually am anticipating having a draft of the document done here in 2 weeks for review, and then it'll be going out to some level of public review as well, or public comment, I should say, as well. So quickly, what we basically said in Tulare Lake is we are going to absolutely protect 90% of all wells. We are going, if water levels in that area are more than 30 feet above the 90 percentile, we were going to then use that value, because we want to use the higher of the two, essentially. So we looked at 90% of all wells and what that elevation is, and then we looked at the lowest elevation we've ever encountered in that area, and then added 30 feet to that, and if whichever one of these two is higher is the value we picked. Because we don't want, it's not like, oh, you just go ahead and allow the water levels to drop down to this. That's exactly the opposite of what we're trying to accomplish. The 30 feet was selected because we looked at what happens in some of the dry years and then how much rebound we get in the wet years. So that's the above the clay. Below the clay, what we basically said is that subsidence is going to govern. We are we've came up with a water elevation that we want to maintain below the clay. We are translating that into some initial pumping restrictions, and then in both cases, if we're not seeing the kind of improvement that we were expecting, then we're going to implement more monitoring and including up to more management actions, meaning, you know, more restrictions on pumping above or below the clay, or in certain areas. We've also, you know, not to get into detail or into the weeds, but we've also broken the whole sub-basin down into these polygons that roughly have the same number of wells, you know, so that when we're actually, our representative monitoring wells are truly going to represent an equal number of wells roughly, and at the same depth. We are installing more RMS wells, or we're committing to installing more RMS wells. We're also looking to install more data points and monitoring locations for subsidence, especially in some of the key areas along levees, aqueducts, things of that nature. On water quality, we are, again, installing more, or committing to more monitoring. We've used the MCLs, or the water quality objectives, where the lower, or the higher of those two values, excuse me, got that backwards, as our measurable objectives, and those are our MTs, and then we want to do enough monitoring to ensure that if we start to identify problems early on that we can, address those. And again, it may mean, some kind of well mitigation programs. It may mean limiting pumping. So there are other, you know, the way the document is kind of prepared is it presents our undesirable results, obviously our MOs and MTs, and then what we've really beefed up in this document is what happens in order to avoid those MTs, and how, if we do hit them, what we're going to do. So it's much more of a true plan this time, as opposed to really just focus on a value of, here's an MO value or an MT value. Those are important, but I think from the state board comments, it made it very clear that they want to see what active steps are you going to take to avoid, and if you do hit these values, what are you actually going to do as well. All right.
Mayor, if you're anticipating a draft document's going to be ready in 2 weeks, that means that you're not planning to submit the document to the state board with the intention of them having time to review it before the hearing, right?
We've told them that we're turning it to them by March 16th.
Okay.
And they're not happy with that.
Yeah, I was gonna say, they said it was a 3-month review period,
Yeah,
so.
we understand.
I think that the intent is to have it before state board, which really proves the last document moot, and that maybe state board members would pay the probationary determination until we have a chance to review it. So that's really the only chance we have, but
Yeah.
it's putting the
Better to do it right than have it rush something and the staff just shoves it aside and then we get jammed, so.
Yeah, these revised documents is not an easy task, and it takes a lot more time than really the 180-day, the original one, that should have been longer. And there should have been more back and forth with the department to have success.
Plus, it's been a bit moving target every time we
Yeah.
think we hear what.
It's been a moving target. Yeah, and going first, it would have been great to have someone else's draft staff report going, oh, I see what you want here.
Right.
I see what your focus is,
We
right?
used to call it, guess what I'm thinking?
Yeah.
When I was in the government, working as a regulatory person,
Yeah.
guess what I'm thinking?
So, speaking
That's
of,
what I'm
you're,
thinking this month versus last month.
Right, right.
And it's expected, I just wanted to make sure I get that right.
yeah, you heard it absolutely right. We understand, and we're just gonna go with, you know, like Mike said, we wanna get it right.
Yeah.
Okay, the other thing I was gonna mention for Tulare Lake, we have some of the state board members coming down for a visit, with the state occurring, next Tuesday. So we've met with some of them already. We're meeting with 2 more of them on Tuesday, and then a 5th one, in February. So we are meeting with state board staff, we are meeting with state board members. So I think from that standpoint, you know, Tulare Lake is doing some things, and, you know, you know, we're still, like I said, we're going full on out to get this thing wrapped up here and get that draft out, and then get it revised and finalized by the middle of March. Okay, I'm not seeing any questions, so I'm gonna keep moving. MORP, you know, as Susan said, we had a meeting last week as a group. One of the things that we've talked a lot about in the Tule Subbasin has been the fact that we're going to put these pumping restrictions. And so one of the items that Deanna has asked us to do, ask Geosyntec, is that, hey, once all these pumping restrictions are in place in Tri-County, what are we looking at, especially, you know, with maybe different allocations above and below the clay? What are we looking at in terms of land, you know, that might be fallowed? And obviously that connects the GSP and the MLRP programs, you know, together. And if anyone's ever had any doubt as to why we got involved in MLRP, this is 100% the reason. It was, we know that there's potential land repurposing that's going to happen in Tri-County, and we want to make sure that there's a good plan for that. And that's actually what Max is working on. And Max, you want to just give everybody maybe a quick update, a little bit more about maybe that meeting on last week as well?
Yeah, let me unmute myself. So yeah, it was a good meeting last week. I was able to come up and meet everyone. There were the state block grant teams there. Department of Conservation had folks there, which was great because we got to really get their kind of insight and priorities as they start setting up their frameworks for reviewing and approving projects for funding. So Kathy and I had some good discussions with them during the meeting in the afternoon. Just getting out there in the field and making the connections with the local partners has some value as well. And then our team, Amir, Kathy, and Deanna, and I got together to plan out some of our scheduling stuff in the afternoon as far as when some of the key deliverables for the local plan would be coming together. So since that, I've been working on revising that a little bit, and I owe that back to Deanna. And then working on a rough estimate of kind of the area acres of land that could be or should be participating in the program based on the average kind of historical pumping uses and the allocations, and looking at how many acres essentially are we talking about in the MLRP world.
Max brought up a bunch of good points to me the other day when he and I were talking here a few weeks ago about, we're going to make a few assumptions about what land use is going to look like, cropping patterns and other things going into the future. But, for an area that's got a lot of trees, it means one thing. So that all of that is going to affect the land fallowing that we think may occur due to the implementation of these pumping restrictions, and especially if we, if what happens, like we said, in order to get the sites that are controlled, we may end up putting in even stricter limitations. So we are working on that. The other point that I'll mention on MLRP is that in addition to the local plan that Max is working on, we are still moving forward with the design of the basin, which is on the near Allensworth, which is being paid for by Sigma funds. If you remember, one of the things that we're incorporating into that is a habitat component of that, and we did meet with Audubon, and Kathy introduced me to the new Audubon rep who's going to be working with us because we're going to take the treated wastewater from the Allensworth wastewater plant and use that for partially for recharge and partially in the winter months for wetlands and other areas like that we can incorporate into some habitat. So we're going to be working closely with Audubon to help us design a system that's the neighbors have some concerns about odors and nuisance and all that kind of stuff. So we're going to we want to work with them on that, and this is the perfect reason why we have an MLRP program is for things like this where we can bring in these experts and other people that have these skills and help us design facilities that do have these multi-benefit to them. I don't know if you want to add anything to MLRP.
Not really, but just, hey, Max, we're probably going to have a call with the Audubon folks next week to just kind of chat on the Allensworth project and then some other ideas, because Sammy, who used to be their water program, they did some work on the BLM property, which is within Tri-County, on some water needs for the wetlands, which might be incorporated into the plan.
Yeah, I two other quick updates is as part of the local plan development, we're engaging with the block grant group to make sure that we're staying up to date on the work that they're doing and their partners are doing. Tomorrow there is an update, a demo of some of the kind of toolkit web dashboard stuff that has been developed by TNC and UC Merced. So I'll be joining that to make sure that we can leverage that work and that information and then identify, if there's any holes in it or extensions that we need to make for our work. And then there's also planning ongoing for the outreach and engagement piece. There's a second workshop that I think has been scheduled tentatively for March 26th, I think was the date that they picked.
It's being
Unfortunately-
changed, Max. We had several conversations yesterday, and actually, I think the whole show is being changed because Allison and I had a more in-depth conversation with Malia and Robert about the effectiveness of the workshop, especially for the landowners. And so we spent about an hour yesterday afternoon kind of reframing our direction, and I think we're looking at April because of, I think it was April 17th, I believe, is the date we're looking at, but that's not set in stone yet. They stopped to ensure they can secure location.
Okay, great.
Susan, do you have some more updates on the outreach, the grower advisory group, or anything else on the local
We
things
will
that are
be-
going on?
Yes, we will be holding a ag advisory group meeting in February, on the 20th of February. At that time, we will likely be going over the topics that we want to address at the larger workshop, just to get feedback from the local growers on the type of information that they're looking for, and make sure that we're meeting their needs. So that's our next ag advisory meeting. Just a quick note that the trust has had one project already approved. And we are in the midst of submitting our second project, and that will happen hopefully tomorrow or Friday. We are working on a consultation with Fish and Wildlife for a exemption on the ER. We have to consult with them and get their approval first. So once we have that, our package is ready to be submitted for review. And that's for Caponero.
That's great. Thank you, Susan. Thank you, Max. Again, I'm not seeing any questions, so I'm gonna keep on moving. Maybe we'll get out of here early for a change.
So we always say that.
We always say that.
Good discussion.
Yeah, and I say that every time, and none of you believe me anymore. The allocation policy. So changing gears on everybody for a little bit. Deanna and I have had a lot of conversations about the allocation policy, how it was originally established. Is it serving the purpose that we want it to serve? Does it need to be adjusted? We're also getting a lot of feedback from some of the growers, good and bad. In some cases, people are feeling that some of our neighboring subbasins are, maybe more generous with this, and we've been too restrictive. And so there's been a lot of questions raised by some of the landowners, especially related to precip credits. I'm pointing out the window at the rain coming down. So there's been a lot of questions, and we always knew that this is a policy that needed to be updated and revised and make sure that it's actually succeeding in accomplishing what we wanted to accomplish, which is this trying to balance stigma with the economic development of this area, and the needs of the people in this area and the stakeholders. So we've had a lot of conversations about that, and we're probably gonna start into a program of looking at, some revisions to, the policy in particular. You wanna add more detail or?
I will say, the way we were currently managing precipitation credits, we've looked at that a lot. We engaged Four Creeks on that, and there will be a change, in how we've been managing precipitation credits. I believe we're gonna add that as a bucket to Basin Safe for our landowners, and that those precipitation credits will carry over. They're currently, taking a look back from December of '22 through the end of last year. And any precipitation credits that, were lost just on how we did the accounting, because our precipitation credits did not roll over, how would you say that?
Zero out.
They zero out at the
Yeah.
end of each billing period, and
Yeah.
we had a very wet first quarter, and then those precipitation credits zeroed out and did not carry over. So we're gonna go back, and they're reviewing that, and they're going to, look at how many precipitation credits, zeroed out, and we're gonna add them back to the account. So, for everybody on this call, if you had precipitation credits, that should have been applied over the year and rolled off at the end of the first quarter, they're gonna be added back to your account. That said, what is due in billing is still due. We're not going to go back and readjust last year's billing, but you will have some credits. It will affect your fourth quarter, because fourth quarter billing has not gone out yet, so it will affect your fourth quarter statement in a positive way. And hopefully the new way we're managing that will better line up with wet years. It was fine until we had a very wet year, and then it didn't reflect what was truth on the ground. So it will never be perfect. It is an ET calculation calculated into an acre foot, but we certainly want it to be equitable and not punitive in wet years. So we're going to make those adjustments.
Deanna, will that change the sustainable yield allocation, because would it be adjusted for precipitation?
No.
No, it will be, what they're gonna do is they're just gonna add the precipitation effective precipitation that happened into a bucket for a credit, but it won't change the current sustainable yield that we have.
Are you doing that, monthly, yearly?
Quarterly.
Quarterly.
Okay.
Yeah, right, along with billing.
Yeah, it'll be done quarterly, so instead of zeroing out at the end of the quarter, if there's credit, it'll roll over, but it will be the first thing used in the next cycle. So the very first thing used and subtracted off your account will be the precip credit. So whatever that bucket is. So the idea is, unless for some reason we had an incredibly wet fourth quarter, we don't expect it to roll year to year.
Yeah.
You know, we would, yeah.
It should be used up during the year, but
Yeah.
it will more accurately reflect wet years. So, allocation policy going forward, we are going to be talking about it, looking at it. I will say, in doing scenarios in the revisions, Tom Harder has been looking at 25% accelerated ramp downs, 50% accelerated ramp downs, and 75% accelerated ramp downs.
Yeah.
In order to assess how we can meet our goals. Others are accelerating the ramp downs, and we are gonna have to look at that, or at minimum, we're gonna have to look at more than just penalty fees as disincentive. So there will be changes to the allocation policy, and we do have to meet the goals. We can't continue to overdraft in the long term. So it's not a very rosy conversation again, but we're going to start going into the we're going to dig into the allocation policy and try to come up with something that meets our goals and is still as equitable for everybody as we can make it.
What other
That are
ramping down, or accelerating ramping?
accelerating rep downs, you know, I'm reluctant to say, I believe Pixley and Laura Dooley are, but, and that's the
Hasn't
word,
been voted on
but it
yet.
hasn't been voted on yet. Yeah, it's not official, but the indication is that's what they're gonna do.
And Eastern Tule is facing increasing pressure as well, so they are looking at potential.
They have pressure on both sides.
Well,
Yeah,
right.
yeah.
Well, it's coming from one particular side, but it's for the allocation as well.
So there's when we go back in our presentation today and you look at the map and you look at the subsidence issues as well as the domestic well issues, you can see that we are not going to meet our goals unless we do more restrictive pumping. And that's just factual.
So the precip credit is the good news, but the harsh reality also is that we are definitely gonna be looking at, you know, is it working? And if it's not working, we have to make some changes. And trying to balance that is gonna be the, you know, it's where this group is actually very important to help come up with some ideas and suggestions and get some buy-in from this group as to how we're gonna be able to balance those two. What Sigma's always been about. So that was partial good news. I almost ended on a happy note there. Almost. But the good news is, like I said, we definitely recognize the precip credits, and there will be steps taken in as Deanna said, you'll see adjustments in your first quarter, which should all be positive to all the growers on here. All right.
Deanna and Amir, this is Sebastian Silvera.
Hi, Sebastian.
Hi there. I do have one clarifying question with respect to the precip credits. Will those be available to the newly annexed properties that were joined Tri-County this?
Yes, you won't receive last year's because you didn't have debits last year, but you will receive them going forward. So I think the intent is to have the account begin at January 1. So whatever precip accumulates in this year, in 2024, will go to your account.
Excellent. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Hey, Amir and Deanna, I had a question for you as well. This is Steve. The pumping restrictions, are you guys considering like bifurcating above and below the clay?
Yes, very much so.
Because we, personally farming in the Kuya area, looking what's going on around the basins, we've got to find ways to help sustain ag. And if we could bifurcate that allocation, I think there's a little light at the end of the tunnel for some continued pumping above the clay, right? So I saw what you did, Amir. That's great for Tulare Lake. I think that's the right direction. It's going to be a little tough to monitor all of that, but
Yes.
I think that's the right direction, because I think below the clay is where I think everybody sees where that's really hammering the subsidence issue everywhere. So
Yeah. I would say that Tri-County is moving forward with a well registry. It's going to be on Basin Safe. It'll have its own, it'll have its own tab on Basin Safe. We are going to begin to require that data be added to Basin Safe, and it is in preparation of that. I foresee eventually. I really believe the entire subbasin is going to have to go to that, but they're not there yet. But we're going to push forward with that and prepare for that.
And then one last question, the precip, are we looking at actual? How is it going to be basically actual by quarter, you said? Is that how it's going to be allocated?
Yeah, Steve, we're gonna look at actual precip for last year.
Right.
And let's just say, I'm gonna make up some numbers, so this is just me making up some numbers. But let's just say it was, first quarter was 4 inches and you used up 3, I'm just making up a number, right? And that means that that 1 inch, which we would have normally have zeroed out across your entire property, that, whatever that translates to in acre feet, that would then carry over, but that bucket would be the first bucket used the next quarter. We would subtract that amount first. The idea is not to have.
You
go
think
ahead.
you're gonna go the direction of going by area too? I know we had like an hour and a half discussion on this at Kuya the other day by zones. But we went to an average, a long-term, like 25-year average up there. So I don't know, basin-wide, I think Kuya was trying to coordinate, but I guess the Tule, I think is more, you're saying everybody's more actual there. Is that correct? Not an average.
No, I believe that Lower Tule and Pixley and Eastern Tule are all using a 20-year rolling, or
I think it's like
Right.
23 or 24
yeah,
years now.
23-year rolling. We're not doing that, Steve. We're going to go with the actual precipitation for that.
Yeah, no, that's
year.
fine. I mean, I just was curious because I know everybody's trying to coordinate.
Yeah, so, I mean, this rain that we're having now would definitely, would affect your 24. By the way, there was still precip credits occurring in our current calculation, but we were just zeroing them out. If there was anything left, we were still saying, okay, we were just zeroing that out. We don't want to zero it out anymore. So it wasn't like you weren't getting any credits in the past. You were just getting whatever happened in that quarter, and then we zero it out. And instead, we're going to roll it over now.
No, I would appreciate, I mean, I appreciate that on behalf of landowners. I think that's great.
Yeah.
I will note that does align with Lower Tule and Pixley, which I believe has created a policy where they go back and correct the precip now. So.
Okay. Okay, any other questions before we move off of the allocation issue? Okay. David, you weren't on my agenda, but since I've got a couple minutes, I was going to ask if you wanted to add anything or give any update to this group on the legislative side. You got to unmute yourself, David.
Thanks, Amir. No, not at this time. Our team is going to have a meeting with Deanna on Friday and go over a lot of things at that time. I really don't have much of an update, since they've been meeting just for a short time so far. And obviously the biggest problem they have is they have a lot of, things they'd like to advance, but there's differences in Sacramento on whether there's a $38 billion or $68 billion deficit. The governor's trying to position it as a $38 billion deficit, but the legislative commission that tracks the budget claims that it's $68 billion. So they're trying to get that settled out. But in any case, by your next meetings, we will have quite a bit more information for you because there will have been more that's taken place. A lot of things are just in committee at this point.
What's $30 billion between friends?
Yeah.
I know, it's pretty discouraging.
Yeah. Yeah, that's to say the least. I guess we shouldn't count on any grant money coming down, any more new grant money, I should say.
I don't think so.
All right.
There's
thank
an
you.
awful lot of, there's going to be a lot of cutbacks. There's just have to face it and do it. And as you're seeing in business in California, there's every day there's more news about layoffs. And one of the other things they're really grappling with is artificial intelligence. AI is really rising to the top because they just don't want it to get out of control. And I know all of us have already been somewhat affected by it, with our iPhones and the kinds of emails and that we're receiving that are not necessarily real, et cetera. So anyway, there's a lot there on the plate, but we'll have a comprehensive report for you at the next meeting.
Great. Thank you, David. I think everybody would be very interested in hearing what the budget ends up looking like. So thank you. Oh man, we might actually be done early. Yes. Okay. Quickly, Board meeting next February 1, which is next Thursday at 1 here.
Yes.
And then, oh, go ahead.
The advisory committee meeting, though, we're gonna have to reschedule. That day is now a tour, for, Julie managers and it's either Laurel or Nicole, I don't remember which one it's that day, but we have a tour scheduled that day.
On the Chile side.
On the Chile side, yeah. So I'm thinking maybe, Thursday, February 29th, but we'll send out something.
Is the
Sorry
meeting
about
on
that.
February, pardon me for interrupting, is the meeting on February 1st at 1 o'clock?
Yeah,
Yes.
at 1 o'clock.
Thank you.
Yes. All right, are we good?
That's it.
All right, thank you, everybody. Stay safe, stay dry.
Thank you, everybody.
See you next month.
Don't stay
Take care.
dry.
Don't stay dry. Yeah, don't stay dry.